Hey guys, welcome back to the garage with the Honda Africa Twin. Today we're gonna do the 4,000 mile scheduled maintenance. Although the real maintenance happens at 8,000 miles where you gotta replace stuff with new parts and so on, the 4,000 miles, it's mostly a look and make sure everything is okay, and that's what we're gonna do today. So enough for the chit chat, let's get on it. This scheduled maintenance only has 9 items to take care of, 7 of which is just inspect, 2 is clean, and 1 of those 7 is actually for the DCT. We'll talk about that as well, nothing difficult, just a check. But the reason I'm down here right now is because the first item, it's actually down here. This is the crankcase breather. There are 3 on the bike, 2 on this side, 1 on the other side, and for my experience, the only one that actually accumulates oil is this one over here, right by the toolbox. So you pull this one out, and then, simple enough, first get the clamp and slide it up. Second, put a little cup under the breather. And third, just unplug it and let the oil come out. As you guys can see, there is really not much in there. Breather number 2, it's actually back here, and that is usually empty up to this point. Breather number 3 is on the right hand side of the bike, right by the radiator fan. And as you guys can see, this one is clean too. It is time for the drive chain inspection. This is the time where you actually clean it, lube it, and make sure that the slack is appropriate. The slack that Honda requires is 35 to 45 millimeters. Every time I do a chain adjustment, it's kind of controversial, and I can already see this one being controversial because when you push the chain up, the chain hits the swing arm. So the sensible thing would be from all the way up against the swing arm, down 35 to 45 millimeters. Get yourself a metric little tape or gauge or whatever you want to call this thing. Put it exactly in between the middle of the front sprocket and the middle of the rear sprocket, and then measure up and down. Easy as that. If you need to adjust it, simple enough. Go on the other side, undo the axle nut, use the adjustment nuts to push the axle forward or back as required. Remember that there is a wear indicator over here, so as long as you're in the green, you're okay. If you're past the green, time to replace chain and sprocket. Always replace chain and sprocket at the same time. Then torque the axle nut back to his 100 Newton meters. Since we are down here and you want to be extra meticulous, there is another couple of things you can do. First of all, check the shape of the sprockets, rear and front, and check the torque on the nut of the rear sprocket and the bolt of the front sprocket. The next item on the list, you need to check the wear of the chain slider. The chain slider is this rubbery, plasticky part under the chain over here, and there is a wear indicator. As long as the slider is not worn down to the wear indicator, you're okay and you can move on. The next 2 steps are related. One is check the brake fluid, the other one is check the brake pads. When it comes to the rear reservoir, we have an upper and a lower line. We need to make sure that the fluid is somewhere in between. If the fluid is at the lower line or below, the manual says check the brake pads first. If you add fluid and your brake pads are worn out, when you replace the brake pads, you're gonna overflow and spill the fluid over here, which is corrosive to your beautiful paint job, so don't do that. When it comes to the front reservoir, there is no max line, there is only a lower line, so look through the side glass and make sure that the fluid is not below the lower line. Another thing you need to do before you check the fluid is to make sure that the reservoir is flush, parallel to the ground. So push the handlebar forward and then stand up the bike and check the fluid level. It's time to take a look at the brake pads. You can actually see the wear on the brake pads because they have wear indicators. So by just looking in there, you can actually see that those brake pads are still A-OK. Same thing when it comes to the rear brake pads. If you look in there, there is actually a wear indicator, and that'll tell you if it's time to replace the brake pads or not. The next item on the list is for DCT only, and is the brake lock. They just want you to check that it still works, that it locks. So you just pull it, put the lock on, let it go, make sure that the bike doesn't move, and that's it. This next item is for the manual transmission only. Pretty much they want you to adjust the clutch. They say that the slack should be between 10 and 20 millimeters. I find myself adjusting it to what feels comfortable to me rather than what the manufacturer wants me to have. And as long as it works for me, I'm the one riding the bike, so that is it. If you need to adjust it, there is a dial up front. You just loosen up the big wheel and move the little wheel in or out. If you need to do major adjustment, at that point you need to go down and adjust it on the other side of the cable. Next item on the list is the spark arrestor. Spark arrestors, there are two of them and they're inside over here. You need to get to them and you just need to clean it. So 5mm Allen, and let's start taking it apart. And this thing should just slide forward. Those two things are the spark arrestors we're talking about, and they're held in place by three 8mm bolts. And at this point, just pull it out. Remember that when you pull it out, you also have a gasket that needs to go back there. And the thing they want you to clean, it's that. So just grab a brush and clean it up. Tell you the truth, they weren't really that dirty. But I have a couple of pointers for you guys out there. First of all, remove the top one first, because if you remove the bottom one, there is a chance that one of the bolts from the top will fall inside the bottom one, which happened to me. Another thing to remember is when I saw the bolt falling in, I was like, I'll just use my magnet and pick it out. Well, surprise, surprise, those are not magnetic at all. So what I had to do is put a little bit of double tape on top of my magnet and go fish it out. It worked, but still something that I've done it, so you don't have to. Another thing is the top one is going to be a little hard to remove, so grab a screwdriver and get some leverage to pull it out. When it comes to the bottom one, once you're trying to insert it in, it doesn't have to just go through the first hole. There is another pipe down here that it needs to go into. So fiddle a little bit around. The other pipe is slightly below, and try to put it in. Flush. And now just put the bolts back on. When you put in the cap back on it, there is this little slot up here that needs to go in there. There is a specific position, so make sure you match those two. And then the 5mm Allen back on it. Once everything is torqued, moving on to the last step. Last step in this 4,000-mile service is wheels and tires. When it comes to the tires, make sure that they're not worn off, make sure that the tire pressure is proper, and there are no cuts or other defects on the tires itself. When it comes to the wheel itself, check obviously the torque specs on the axle nuts, front and back. Make sure all the spokes are nice and tight. You can bounce very lightly a little wrench on it and make sure they make the proper sound. If they're loose, they're gonna make a dull sound. You'll get the ears after a while. Other than that, check the rims, make sure there are no dents, make sure that there is nothing that is gonna affect the safety of your ride. One last thing to do to the wheels is to check the bearings. Now, at 4,000 miles, chances are the bearings are good, but put the bike on a stand, then grab the forks and shake side to side the front wheel, do the same with the rear wheel and see if there is any movement. No movement, the bearings are good, and you are done. We are done as well for today. Most of the action we took today could have been grouped together. So when you're checking the fluid, the brake pads, you can also check the tires and the wheels and the chain slack all in one sweep. Same thing up front. If you ride a lot of off-road, obviously things are gonna be worse. So you gotta check the chain a little closer, you gotta check the brakes a little closer, and you might also wanna check the air filters. I'm gonna do it in my 8,000 mile service, which is coming up soon enough, even if the manual calls for it at 12,000, because there is a lot of dust over here. I'm gonna do it, or at least I'm gonna inspect it at 8,000. Also, the items we've done today are gonna repeat every 4,000 miles, so even in the next maintenance intervals, you can rewatch this video and get an idea of what's going on. For everything I used in this video, check the description down below. Thank you very much to my patrons, and because I love you guys so much, for specs, torques, and procedure in general, check the Patreon page underneath the video. There's gonna be links and files that you guys can download and use while you're doing all of this. Other than that, thank you all for watching my videos. Work on your bike, and I'll see you next time.